Chosen one. There's something inside you that even you haven't named yet. Not ambition, not ordinary loneliness. A weight like you're carrying something bigger than yourself and you don't know where it came from. In your quietest moments you've thought, this doesn't belong to my lifetime. It belongs to someone who came before me. Stop right there, because what you just felt, that's not imagination. That's bloodline memory, and it's been knocking for a long time. It's time you answered the door. Here's the thing, you didn't come across this video because you were bored. You came here because something in you is stirring, and you don't have the right word for it yet. Not a crisis, not peace either. Something in between. A readiness without a destination. A pull without a name. And the world around you doesn't have a category for that feeling. So you've been carrying it quietly, folding it into your daily routine, telling yourself it'll make sense eventually. Maybe you've called it restlessness. Maybe you told yourself you just need a change of scenery, a better opportunity, a fresh start. But it keeps returning, that same weight, that same low hum beneath the surface of your normal life. Like something upstream is trying to reach you and the current isn't quite strong enough yet. You've learned to live alongside it without really looking at it. But here's what I need you to understand, that feeling isn't a malfunction. It's a signal. And signals don't disappear just because you've gotten used to ignoring them. Stay with me, because what I'm about to say isn't going to comfort you in the way you're used to being comforted. It's going to make you see more clearly. And from that clarity, everything shifts. What you're experiencing isn't disorder. It's not a symptom of something broken inside you. What you're feeling is the early pressure of a spiritual inheritance mechanism moving into its activation phase. Think about that. Not chaos. A mechanism. One that's been running quietly in the background of your life long before you had the awareness to recognize it for what it actually is. Here's what nobody tells you. Every system has a moment where it transitions from dormant to active. A seed doesn't announce when it's about to crack open. There's no ceremony, no dramatic signal. One day, it's completely still beneath the soil. The next, something inside it is moving, reaching, pushing toward light. That's not magic, that's design. The gardener doesn't plant seeds that he intends to leave dormant forever. He plants seeds that are timed, and timing is not the same as delay. Timing means the conditions weren't ready yet. You weren't ready yet. But something has shifted, and that shift is why you're here. Now watch this. This video, these 10 chapters, aren't a general walk through spiritual awakening from beginning to end. That's not what this is. This is something more specific, more surgical. We're going deep into one layer, and one layer only. The man or woman who walked before you one generation back. Your grandfather, maybe your grandmother. They carried something, a mission, a calling, a divine assignment that didn't fully take form in their lifetime. And the way the gardener works, the operating principle of how holy things move through time, is this: sacred seeds don't die with the body that carried them. They get preserved, they get passed forward to someone with enough depth of soil to hold them without being crushed by the weight. That someone is you. And I don't say that lightly, and I'm not saying it to make you feel chosen in a comfortable, easy way. I'm saying it because the evidence has already been showing up in your life. You've been feeling its edges, the dreams that don't quite belong to your own story, the emotions that surface without a clear memory, attach the inexplicable sense that you're supposed to be doing something bigger than what your current life contains. Those aren't signs of instability. Those are dispatch signals from an inheritance that's been waiting for your awareness to arrive at the right address. Take a breath right now. Not a rushed one, the kind that tells your whole system, I'm still here, I'm paying attention, because chaos is simply the name people give to mechanisms they haven't learned to read yet. What's been feeling like turbulence in your life is actually the friction of something ancient trying to come online inside something current. Your grandfather's story didn't end when his body did. It was planted into the soil of your bloodline, into the architecture of who you are. The way you hold pressure, the gifts you carry, that no one taught you, the things you sense before you can explain them. These aren't accidents of personality. They are evidence of transfer. Chosen one. Today, we stop calling this confusion. Today, we read the mechanism for what it is. The last thing we established is this: what you've been feeling isn't disorder, it's a mechanism, a living transfer, something ancient moving through the architecture of your bloodline toward activation. But before we go deeper into what that transfer looks like, we have to deal with something that's been working against you, something installed so early and so quietly that you've never stopped to question it. Because here's the truth: the way the world taught you to think about inheritance is one of the most energy-draining frameworks you've ever accepted. And until we dismantle it, it'll keep pulling the ground out from under everything you're trying to build. Here's the thing. When most people hear the word inheritance, their mind goes immediately to the visible land money, a family name with weight behind it, a business passed down with documents and signatures. And if none of those things came to you from your grandparents, the quiet conclusion the world lets you draw is this: you weren't left anything. You start from zero. Whatever you build alone from scratch, without the advantage of those who came before you. That framework sounds humble, it sounds realistic, but it's one of the most corrosive lies a generation can inherit, and it leaks energy every single day you believe it. Think about that. A person who believes they received nothing from their ancestors will spend enormous amounts of internal energy trying to generate from zero what was actually already placed inside them. It's like a man who's been given a well but keeps carrying water from a river 3 miles away, not because the well doesn't exist, but because no one ever told him to look down. The exhaustion isn't from the work, it's from the misdirection. And the first correction we have to make isn't about what you do, it's about where you look. Now watch this. Your grandfather, the man we're talking about throughout this entire video, may not have left you wealth or property. He may not have been famous or publicly influential. He may have been, by the world's measure, ordinary. But here's what nobody tells you about ordinary people who carry divine assignments: their most significant deposits were never made into bank accounts. They were made into people, into you. The discipline he exercised in silence, the way he moved through difficulty without disintegrating the quality of his presence in a room, those weren't personality quirks. Those were spiritual currencies being stored in a vessel that would one day reach you. Stay with me, because this next part matters. The second way the world taught you wrong is this: it equated your grandparents' silence with shallowness. We live in a culture that rewards volume. The person who tells their story loudest, who documents everything, who builds a public narrative around their journey, that person gets recognized. Your grandfather's generation often said nothing. They carried their assignments quietly, without ceremony, without an audience. And because they left no content trail, no highlight reel, the conclusion felt obvious: there wasn't much there. Let that land. Because that conclusion is exactly backwards. In any serious room, a boardroom, a negotiation, a high-stakes conversation, the person with the least need to fill the silence is usually the one operating from the deepest reservoir. The one who speaks once precisely and doesn't need to repeat themselves. Silence isn't absence. Silence is a specific kind of strength that only develops through years of carrying something heavy without putting it down. Your grandfather sat in that silence. And what he was doing in it wasn't daydreaming. He was in a form of communion that his generation understood and yours was never taught to recognize. The third misunderstanding is perhaps the most damaging, the belief that you are a blank slate, that you arrived into this life as a fresh document with no prior content. Modern psychology and epigenetic research have already begun to dismantle this. The data shows that emotional memory stress responses, even behavioral tendencies, transfer biologically through generations. But you don't need a research paper to confirm what you've already sensed. You've walked into situations you've never faced before and known exactly how to handle them. You've had instincts that felt older than your own experience. You felt a gravity in certain decisions that couldn't be explained by your own history alone. That's not intuition you developed. That's inherited discernment, a tool your grandfather used passed forward without a label. Here's the thing, you didn't start from zero. You started from where he stopped. The map he was drawing didn't disappear when he left. It transferred to the one in the bloodline with enough depth to continue it. And the reason you've been feeling that unnamed weight that pulled towards something larger is because you've been standing at the edge of his unfinished line, and something in you already knows which direction it was heading. Anointed One. The inheritance was never missing. It was just waiting for you to stop looking in the wrong places. You didn't start from zero, you started from where he stopped. That's where we left off, and that single reframe changes everything about how you interpret what's been happening inside you. Because once you accept that you're not a blank slate, once you accept that something real was deposited into your architecture before you ever made a single conscious choice, the next question becomes urgent. What do you do with the signals that have already been arriving? The ones you've been dismissing, explaining away, or quietly filing under things I don't understand about myself. It's time we open that file. Here's the thing. There's a specific category of experience that people who carry inherited assignments tend to share, and almost none of them talk about it openly because the world doesn't have a dignified language for it. It gets labeled as anxiety, sensitivity, overthinking, or emotional dysregulation. And because those labels come with the implication that something needs to be fixed, the person carrying these experiences spends years trying to manage them rather than read them. That's the trap. You can't read a signal while you're trying to suppress it. The first experience is what I call orphaned emotion. You feel something, grief or a sudden weight or an inexplicable sadness, and there's no event attached to it. Nothing happened. No trigger you can point to. The old version of you called this a mood, a hormonal shift, maybe a sign that you needed better sleep. But stay with me. Research in transgenerational psychology has documented something specific. Unprocessed emotional experiences from previous generations can travel forward through biological and behavioral pathways, surfacing in descendants as feelings that have no direct memory attached. You're not manufacturing emotion from nothing. You're receiving something that was never fully discharged in the generation before you. That's not weakness. That's a particular kind of sensitivity, and sensitivity in the right hands is a precision instrument. Think about that. A person who can feel what others can't articulate is not unstable. They're calibrated differently. The question isn't how to turn the sensitivity down, it's how to develop the discernment to know what you're receiving and where it's actually coming from. Your grandfather may have carried grief. He never processed hope. He never voiced a vision he held in silence for decades. When those things didn't find expression through him, the gardener didn't let them dissolve. They moved forward. And some of what you feel in your quietest moments isn't yours alone. It's a conversation that was started upstream and hasn't finished yet. The second experience is architectural dreaming. Not every dream carries weight, most don't. But there's a specific kind that's different, and if you've had it, you already know what I mean. It has structure. It repeats in cycles, sometimes months apart. It leaves a residue when you wake up, not images necessarily, but a feeling, a tone, a sense of direction that lingers into your morning. Carl Jung called these archetypal dreams patterns emerging from layers of the psyche that are deeper than personal memory. Here's what nobody tells you when you dream of an older figure guiding you through an unfamiliar but somehow recognizable landscape, and you wake up not remembering their face, but remembering the feeling of safety that's not random neural activity. That's your inner architecture processing a transfer. Something is being handed to you in the language your waking mind doesn't yet have vocabulary for. Now watch this. The third experience is the most practical and the most overlooked. It's the feeling that your mission doesn't fit inside your current life, not because you failed to build the right life, but because what you're carrying is larger than the container you've been given so far. You work in a normal environment, you handle ordinary responsibilities, but there's a persistent background frequency that says, this isn't the full picture, something bigger is waiting. And because you can't name it precisely, you've been tempted to call it arrogance or escapism or an inability to be grateful for what you have. Let that land, because none of those labels are accurate. That frequency isn't delusion. It's a mission signal that hasn't yet been matched to its proper context. A radio transmitter broadcasting clearly, but the receiver hasn't been tuned to the right frequency yet. The signal's been consistent. The problem was never the signal, it was the calibration. And calibration is exactly what these 10 chapters are designed to do. Not to hand you a new identity, but to help you tune into the one that was already assigned. Take a breath right now, not a rushed one, the kind that creates a half second of genuine stillness. Because here's what I need you to carry into the next chapter. You're not here to fix what's strange about you. You're here to finally read it correctly. Chosen one. The experiences you've been apologizing for are actually the most precise evidence that the transfer is already underway. Stop diagnosing them. Start listening to what they're saying. Stop diagnosing what's strange about you. Start listening to what it's saying. That's where we landed, and now we move forward. Because once you accept that these signals are real, once you stop filing them under things I can't explain, the next question becomes the most important one you've asked in years. Not what's wrong with me, not even what am I supposed to do. The question is, where did this come from? And more specifically, why didn't it die when the person who first carried it did? That's what this chapter is about. The architecture of an unfinished mission, and why the gardener doesn't let sacred seeds expire. Here's the thing. In agriculture, there are seeds that have been stored in the right conditions, dry, cool, protected from light, and then planted decades later, and they still germinate, still grow, still produce fruit. Not because of anything dramatic, not because of a miracle intervention, but because the biological structure of the seed was designed to preserve potential until the conditions were right. The potential didn't degrade, it waited. And the waiting wasn't passive. It was an active form of preservation built into the seed's architecture from the moment it was formed. Think about that. The gardener doesn't design seeds that expire on a human timeline. He designs seeds that respond to conditions. Your grandfather carried a mission. Maybe he knew it clearly. Maybe he only felt its edges a pull towards something he could never quite name, a sense that his life was pointing at something just beyond what his circumstances allowed him to reach. Either way, what he carried was real. And when his body stopped, the world looked at that unfinished work and called it incompletion. Heaven looked at the same thing and called it planting. Those are not the same event. One is a story ending. The other is a seed entering the ground at exactly the right depth, in exactly the right soil, at exactly the moment the gardener intended. Stay with me, because this is where it gets precise. The preservation mechanism isn't mystical in an untouchable way. It operates through specific channels. The first channel is biological. The patterns of thought, the stress responses, the instinctive behaviors your grandfather developed through decades of carrying his assignment, these don't disappear. They encode. Epigenetic research has documented that lived experience leaves molecular markers on DNA that can be expressed in subsequent generations. You didn't just inherit his eyes or his bone structure. You inherited the neurological imprint of how he moved through the world. That's the first layer of the seed. The second channel is behavioral transmission, the things he modeled that you absorbed without being formally taught. The way he handled a crisis without theatrics. The way he made decisions slowly, deliberately, without needing external validation. The way he held his ground in a room without raising his voice. You watched those things even if you were too young to articulate what you were watching, and they installed themselves into your operating system as default responses you reach for naturally without knowing why they feel familiar. Now watch this. Those defaults aren't just personality. They're transferred tools. Equipment from his workbench that arrived in yours without a label. The third channel is the one the world is least equipped to explain, but the one you've been sensing most directly, the spiritual continuity of an unfinished assignment. Here's what nobody tells you about divine assignments: they aren't attached to one lifetime. They're attached to a bloodline until they reach completion. The book of Habakkuk says it plainly, though the vision tarries, wait for it will surely come, it will not delay. That verse isn't just encouragement for the person who first received the vision, it's a declaration about the vision itself. It has its own momentum. It doesn't need the original carrier to still be breathing in order to remain alive. The reason your grandfather's silence wasn't emptiness is because he was doing something specific in that silence. He was protecting the seed. Not every sacred thing is meant to be spoken before its time. There's a form of wisdom that knows if I expose this too early in the wrong conditions to the wrong audience, it won't survive the environment. So he kept it close. He guarded it through prayer, through private obedience, through the quiet daily practice of a man who knew he was holding something that wasn't fully his to release yet. His silence was seed storage. Chosen one. What he preserved in silence is now in your hands, and the conditions have finally changed. The soil is ready. The season has shifted. What was stored is now ready to be planted through you, by you, in the world that only you can reach. The conditions have changed. The season has shifted. What was stored is now ready to be planted through you, by you, in the world only you can reach. That's where we left off. And now we move into the most practical territory we've covered so far. Because understanding that you carry an inherited assignment is one thing. Knowing how to actually read it, how to identify where it lives inside your life right now today, in the concrete reality of your work and relationships and decisions, that's something else entirely. That's what this chapter is for. The gardener doesn't just plant seeds, he leaves markers, and you've been walking past 3 of them without knowing what you were looking at. Here's the thing. Most people approach the question of calling and purpose as though it's something they need to discover from scratch. A blank search, a new investigation, a journey that starts at 0. But if what we established in the last chapter is true, then the search was never supposed to start from 0. It was supposed to start from a specific address, from the point in your bloodline where the unfinished work was last held. Your grandfather's story isn't background context for your life. It's the opening paragraph of the document you've been trying to write. And the first marker, the first signal you've been walking past, is hiding in plain sight inside your family's behavioral patterns. Every family has what I'd call a signature, a recurring set of responses, instincts, and orientations that repeat across generations. The way they handle loss, the way they respond to authority, the way they build or don't build the things they were capable of building. Most people look at these patterns only through the lens of dysfunction, the generational trauma framework, the cycles to be broken. And yes, some patterns need to be interrupted, but stay with me here. Inside every family signature, alongside the patterns that need to stop, there are patterns that were never meant to stop. Strengths that appeared in your grandfather may be surfaced briefly in your parents' generation and are now pressing for full expression in you. The signal isn't just what your family got wrong. The signal is what your family kept getting right, even under pressure, even without resources, even when the world gave them no stage to perform it on. The practical tool here is simple, and it costs nothing. Ask yourself this: what did my grandfather do naturally that no one else in the family has fully continued? Not what did he say. What did he do consistently, quietly, without needing recognition for it? The answer to that question is rarely dramatic. It's usually something like he always knew when someone in the room was carrying something they weren't saying. Or he never made a major decision without sleeping on it twice. Or he had a way of entering difficult conversations that made the other person feel heard before they felt challenged. Those aren't personality quirks, they're tools, and they're in your hands now, whether you've been using them consciously or not. Now watch this. The second signal is what I call ungifted giftedness, the skills and instincts you carry that you cannot trace back to a lesson or a teacher. Think about the last time you walked into a high-pressure situation and knew, not guessed, knew exactly what the room needed from you. Maybe it was a negotiation where you sensed the precise moment to stop talking and let silence do the work. Maybe it was a conversation with someone in crisis where you said exactly the right thing without rehearsing it. Maybe it was a financial decision where every rational indicator said yes, but something in you said wait, and you were right to wait. That's not luck. That's inherited discernment operating through your nervous system. You've been using your grandfather's tools without realizing they had his name on them. The third signal is the one that carries the most weight and gets dismissed the fastest. It's the unfinished projects of your family line, the businesses that were almost started, the gifts that were almost developed, the doors that were almost walked through but weren't, because the timing was wrong, or the resources weren't there, or the world simply wasn't ready for what that person was carrying. Take a breath right now, a real one, because I want you to hold this next thought without rushing past it. Those unfinished things didn't die. They transferred. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll recognize that at least one of them has been showing up in your own life as an unexplained pull toward a specific type of work, or a recurring idea you keep returning to, or a problem in the world you can't stop thinking about solving. Chosen one, that's not coincidence. That's your section of the map, and it was drawn before you arrived. Your section of the map was drawn before you arrived. That's where we landed, and if that truth settled into you the way it was meant to, something has already shifted in how you're reading your own life. But here's where we have to be careful, because there's a version of everything we've covered so far that feels profound in the moment and produces nothing afterward. You recognize the signals, you locate the patterns, you feel the weight of the inherited assignment pressing against the inside of your chest, and then you wait. You wait for a feeling to confirm it. You wait for a dream that's clear enough, a sign that's undeniable enough, an experience dramatic enough to finally push you across the threshold. And while you're waiting, the season moves. That's the trap. And it's the one I want to dismantle completely before we go any further. Here's the thing. The world has sold a specific image of spiritual activation, and it almost always looks like a moment, a lightning strike, a vision, a word spoken over you by someone with authority that unlocks something previously inaccessible. And because that image is so embedded, so many people who carry genuine inherited assignments are standing at the edge of their own mission, waiting for a feeling that may never arrive in the form they're expecting. Stay with me. In agriculture, the seed doesn't germinate because the soil feels ready. It germinates because the farmer made a decision and acted on it. He broke the ground. He placed the seed at the right depth. He covered it and watered it. The feeling of harvest came later, after the decision, not before it. The gardener designed the system that way on purpose. Activation is not an experience that happens to you. It's a decision you make with full awareness of what you're committing to. Now watch this. The first decision is acceptance, and it's harder than it sounds. Not acceptance in a passive, resigned sense. Active acceptance. The kind that looks at the inherited assignment you've been sensing and says out loud, "This is mine to carry, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise anymore." Because here's what nobody tells you: refusing an inheritance doesn't make it disappear. It just means it sits unclaimed. In practical terms, this looks like the person who has the gift of discernment, but keeps apologizing for it in professional settings. Who says, "I just had a feeling in a boardroom," as though that feeling isn't a precision instrument worth more than the spreadsheet on the table? Acceptance means you stop shrinking the tools you were given to fit the comfort level of rooms that weren't built for them. The second decision is specificity. Not everything at once. One thing. Chosen one. One of the most common ways people avoid activating an inherited assignment is by keeping it beautifully vague. I'm called to something big. I know there's more for me. Those statements are true, and they're also completely inactionable. The seed doesn't respond to general intention. It responds to being placed in specific soil at a specific depth. So the decision here is to name one concrete thing that you're going to carry forward, one capacity, one orientation, one unfinished thread from your grandfather's life, and bring it into the actual specific daily texture of how you operate. Think about that, not a mission statement, a behavior. Maybe it's the way he approached people in conflict with patience that created space instead of pressure. Decide that this week, in one real conversation, you're going to operate from that same orientation. That's not small. That's the first germination. The third decision is perhaps the most quietly powerful and the most frequently skipped. It's the decision to do one thing this week that your grandfather never had the opportunity to do. Not a grand gesture, not a public declaration. Something small and real that moves in the direction of the assignment you've inherited. A conversation you've been postponing. A door you've been standing in front of without stepping through. A skill you've been building privately that's ready to be used in a real context. Here's what happens when you make that move. The spiritual momentum that's been stored in the inheritance responds to it. Not because of mysticism, because of alignment. You've stopped being a vessel that holds the seed and started being the ground that receives it. Let that land. Because the gap between those two things, holding and receiving, is the entire difference between a life spent sensing your assignment and a life spent walking in it. You've been holding for a long time. The awareness you've developed, the signals you've learned to read, the patterns you've finally named, all of that was the preparation. But preparation without decision is just an extended rehearsal. Anointed one. The rehearsal is over. Heaven doesn't need another season of you feeling the weight of what you carry. It needs one clear, grounded, unhurried decision that says, I know what this is, I know where it came from, and I'm ready to plant it. That decision doesn't require a ceremony. It doesn't require a witness. It just requires you. The rehearsal is over. One clear, grounded, unhurried decision, that's what we closed with. And if you've been honest with yourself through these last 6 chapters, something has already begun to reorganize inside you. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but quietly, the way a field looks the same on the surface the morning after the farmer has worked the soil, unchanged to the casual eye, but fundamentally different underneath. Now we move into territory that most conversations about spiritual inheritance never reach, because they stop at the internal, the awakening, the recognition, the emotional shift. And then they leave you there feeling changed, but not knowing what that change is actually supposed to produce in the real, visible, external world. That's what this chapter is about. What happens when the mechanism we've been building on the inside begins to express itself on the outside? Here's the thing. Authority. Real authority, not the performed kind, is one of the most misunderstood currencies in modern professional and social life. The world has taught you that authority comes from accumulation. From the length of your resume, the size of your platform, the number of people who can verify your track record. And those things matter in certain contexts. But stay with me. There's a different kind of authority that operates on a completely different principle, and it's the kind that your grandfather carried without a title, without a platform, without a public profile of any kind. It's the authority that comes from being internally calibrated. From having a center of gravity so stable that the environment adjusts to you rather than the other way around. Think about that in a practical setting. You walk into a boardroom. There are people in that room with more credentials, more years of experience, louder professional histories. And yet something about the way you enter, the way you settle into a chair, without needing to immediately fill the silence, the quality of attention you bring before you've said a single word, shifts the temperature of the room. People can't name it, they feel it. That's not charisma in the performance sense. That's inherited gravity. The same quality your grandfather carried into every room he entered, the weight of a man who had been through enough, held enough, and survived enough to no longer need external confirmation of his own standing. You've been developing that same weight, and it's beginning to show. Now watch this. There's a specific transition that happens when inherited discernment moves from internal sensing to external authority. And it's the transition from seeking confirmation to providing clarity. The old version of you walked into difficult situations looking for someone to validate the direction you were already sensing. You'd feel strongly that a particular path was wrong, a partnership, a contract, a strategic direction, but you'd wait for someone else to articulate it before you trusted your own read. That's not humility. That's a misuse of discernment. Humility is knowing the limits of what you see. Discernment is trusting what you do see clearly enough to act on it. Here's what nobody tells you: the moment you stop needing the room to confirm what you already know, you become the person the room starts looking to for direction. This is where the inheritance expresses itself most visibly in professional life. A colleague presents an opportunity, financially attractive, well-structured on paper, backed by people with strong reputations. But something in you goes still, not anxious, still. The kind of stillness that in your grandfather's generation meant a man was in consultation with something deeper than the surface information in front of him. You felt that stillness before and overridden it because you couldn't justify it with data. Don't do that anymore. That stillness is your most sophisticated analytical instrument, and it was sharpened across a generation before it reached you. Learn to present it without apology. "I need more time with this" is a complete sentence. "Something here doesn't align yet" is a position, not a weakness. But here's the balance that matters as much as anything we've covered. There's a version of this authority that curdles into something else, into a posture of untouchability, a refusal to be corrected, a quiet arrogance that wears the language of discernment as a shield against accountability. That's not inheritance, that's ego using sacred language as cover. Your grandfather's authority, the real kind, the kind worth carrying forward, was characterized by one specific quality. It was stable without being rigid. He could hold his ground without needing to win. He could be questioned without being destabilized. He could change his position when presented with genuine truth without experiencing it as defeat. Anointed One, that quality is the signature of authority that has been forged rather than performed. And it's available to you not as something to manufacture, but as something to return to. Take a breath right now. Feel the difference between the weight of genuine authority and the noise of performed strength. One settles, one exhausts. You already know which one your grandfather carried. Carry that one. One settles, one exhausts. You already know which one your grandfather carried, and now you're learning to carry it yourself. That shift in authority, that transition from performed strength to inherited gravity, doesn't stay contained to one area of your life. It bleeds outward. It touches everything. And one of the places it touches most directly and most practically is your relationship with money. Not because wealth is the goal of what we've been building, but because financial reality is one of the clearest places where the difference between internal structure and internal instability becomes visible. And this chapter is where we stop being polite about that. Here's the thing. There's a version of spiritual teaching that keeps money at arm's length, treats it as a lower conversation, something beneath the dignity of what we've been discussing. And then there's the opposite version that turns every spiritual breakthrough into a promise of financial reward, as though heaven operates like a vending machine that dispenses cash in exchange for the right amount of faith. Both of those frameworks are wrong, and both of them leave people financially stuck in ways that have nothing to do with their actual circumstances and everything to do with the identity structure they're operating from. What we're talking about in this chapter is something more precise. It's the relationship between the internal architecture we've been building, the inherited assignment, the activated discernment, the calibrated authority, and the way financial reality responds to that architecture. Stay with me. Money is a resource, and like every resource in nature, it moves towards structures that can hold and deploy it effectively. Water doesn't flow uphill without a pump. Heat doesn't concentrate in a container with holes. And financial resources at scale over time don't accumulate in lives that don't have the internal structure to manage what arrives. Now watch this. There's research on lottery winners that most people have heard referenced but never fully absorbed. A significant percentage return to their previous financial level within a few years of a major windfall. Not because they're irresponsible people, not because they lack intelligence or desire, but because their internal financial identity, the deep, largely unconscious set of beliefs about what they're capable of holding, what they deserve to keep what level of resource feels normal, was built for a different volume. The money arrived. The structure wasn't ready. and so the system self-corrected back to its default setting. Think about that. The ceiling on your financial life isn't primarily a ceiling on your opportunity. It's a ceiling on your identity. And identity, as we've established across every chapter of this video, is where inheritance does its most significant work. Your grandfather may not have died wealthy. He may have lived in circumstances that never reflected the full weight of what he carried. But the way he related to resource, the way he made decisions about what to steward carefully, what to release generously, what to protect from waste, that relational pattern is part of what transferred to you. And the activation of your inherited assignment includes necessarily the elevation of your financial identity to match the scale of what you've been called to carry. Here's what nobody tells you about stewardship. The word sounds like restraint, like a spiritual justification for having less, for being careful to the point of paralysis. That's not what it means. Stewardship is the posture of someone who understands that what they've been given isn't primarily for their own consumption, it's for a purpose that extends beyond them. And paradoxically, that posture is the single most reliable predictor of expanded financial capacity. The gardener doesn't increase the harvest of a farmer who hoards seed. He increases the harvest of the farmer who plants, strategically manages the field with precision, and understands that abundance is a byproduct of alignment, not a reward for desire. Let that land. Here's what this looks like in the real texture of your financial life. When an unexpected sum arrives, a bonus, a contract, an inheritance in the literal financial sense, the first question that surfaces from your old identity is, what can I get with this? The first question from an activated inherited identity is different. It's, what is this resource designed to do in my hands? Not in an abstract spiritual bypassing way, concretely. Does this capital belong in a business structure? Does it belong in a relationship, investing in someone else's capacity whose work extends the mission you're carrying? Does it belong in a reserve that creates the kind of stability that allows you to make decisions from abundance rather than scarcity? Anointed one. Those questions don't come from financial education alone. They come from a particular relationship with purpose, and purpose, as we've established, has a bloodline address. Your grandfather may have prayed over resources you'll never know about, made decisions with limited means that demonstrated a quality of stewardship you inherited without a lesson plan. The financial identity he carried, however constrained by his circumstances, contained a seed of how resource and mission relate. You are the generation where that seed gets to grow without the same constraints. Chosen one. The question was never whether the resources would come. The question was always whether the structure would be ready when they did. The question was never whether the resources would come. The question was always whether the structure would be ready when they did. That's where we landed, and if you've been honest through everything we've covered, something in you has quietly started to reorganize around that truth. The identity is shifting, the discernment is sharpening, the financial posture is being recalibrated from consumption to stewardship. And it would be easy at this point to feel like the hardest work is behind you, like the remaining journey is simply a matter of moving forward with what you've built. But here's what nobody tells you about the moment things begin to work. It's the most dangerous terrain you'll cross, not because success is a trap, but because the pressures that arrive with early momentum are specifically designed to expose whatever you haven't yet stabilized. Here's the thing. The most common point of collapse in a person's assignment isn't during the difficult season. It's during the first season of visible progress, when the doors start opening, when the right people start noticing, when the financial structure begins to reflect the internal work you've done. That's when a specific set of pressures emerge, quieter than crisis, more insidious than failure. And if you're not watching for them, they'll redirect you so gradually that you won't notice you've drifted until you're somewhere unrecognizable. Your grandfather navigated his assignment through seasons of obscurity, and obscurity, for all its difficulty, has one significant advantage: it keeps the noise low. What you're stepping into has a different noise profile, and you need to know what you're listening for. The first pressure is the weight of other people's expectations. When you begin to move with clarity and authority, the people closest to you will feel it, and some of them will respond with need. Family members who've been watching you from a distance will suddenly have requests. Friends who never asked for much will begin to position themselves around what they sense is coming. Stay with me. This isn't cynicism, and it isn't a reason to build walls. It's a reason to build discernment about the difference between relationships that belong to your assignment and relationships that are drawn to the output of your assignment. Your grandfather walked certain seasons completely alone, not because he was cold, but because he understood that proximity to purpose requires a specific kind of alignment. Not everyone who loves you is equipped to walk with you into what's next. Love them, but don't let their expectations set your pace. Now watch this. The second pressure is the seduction of external validation, and it arrives precisely when you've stopped needing it internally. That's the cruel timing of it. The moment you develop genuine internal authority, the external world begins to offer recognition. Platforms, partnerships, opportunities that carry impressive names and come packaged in the language of alignment. And because they arrive when your discernment is sharpest, they're easy to mistake for confirmation. Think about that. A large organization approaches you about a collaboration, significant visibility, financial upside, access to rooms you've been working toward. But the structure requires you to adjust something fundamental about how you operate, to soften an edge that is actually load-bearing, to modify a position that isn't a preference, it's a conviction that came with the inheritance. The question is never whether the opportunity is real. The question is whether it's designed for who you're becoming or for who you were before the activation. The third pressure is the subtlest and the most personally costly. It's the drift from the root. When the harvest begins, and it will begin, there's a gravitational pull toward the future that can quietly sever your connection to the source that made the harvest possible. You get busy, the work expands, the calendar fills with the very things you were praying for a year ago. And in the middle of all of it, the practices that kept you calibrated, the stillness, the reflection, the conscious acknowledgement of where this assignment came from, start to feel optional. Like maintenance, you can defer because the system seems to be running well on its own. Take a breath right now, a long one, because a tree that stops sending resources to its roots doesn't die immediately. It looks fine for a season. Then one pressure event, one storm, one drought reveals that the foundation was quietly degrading while the canopy looked healthy. The return to the root isn't nostalgia, it's structural maintenance. A simple regular practice of asking, does what I'm building still reflect what was planted? Is the direction I'm moving still continuous with the assignment I inherited, or have I been gradually redirected by the noise of progress? Chosen one. The inheritance your grandfather preserved wasn't preserved, so you could receive it and then lose it to the very success it produced. It was preserved so you could carry it further than he was able to without dropping it in the process. The inheritance was preserved so you could carry it further than he was able to without dropping it in the process. That's the charge we closed with. And now we arrive at the final chapter, not as a conclusion, but as a commissioning. Because everything we've covered across these 10 chapters wasn't designed to leave you with a feeling. It was designed to leave you with a framework so clear, so structurally sound, that you can carry it into the actual weight of your actual life without it collapsing under pressure. So before you move from this space, there are things I need to say directly, not as encouragement, as instruction. Here's the thing. We started with a seed. Your grandfather planted it, not consciously, not with ceremony, but through the accumulation of his obedience, his silence, his willingness to carry an assignment whose full dimensions he may never have fully seen. The gardener received that planting and did what the gardener does, preserved it, timed it, and moved it forward through the bloodline until it reached the generation with enough depth of soil to hold what the seed was always designed to become. That generation is yours. That person is you. Not because you're perfect, not because you've arrived at some final version of yourself, but because the conditions are right, and the conditions are right precisely because of everything you've been through that you couldn't explain at the time. Stay with me for this. The delays that frustrated you weren't punishment. The seasons of obscurity that made you question whether you were on the right path, those weren't abandonment. The gardener doesn't leave fields unattended. He works in them in ways that aren't always visible from the surface. What looked like nothing happening was preparation happening. What felt like being overlooked was being protected from exposure before the root system was deep enough to support what was coming above ground. Think about that. A harvest that comes before the root is established doesn't survive its own weight. The timing wasn't cruelty, it was precision. Now watch this. You are not here to become your grandfather. That's not what inheritance means, and it's not what this transfer requires. You're not here to complete his version of the assignment. You're here to carry the seed he protected into territory he never reached in a form the world he lived in couldn't have held. His silence was the language of his season. Your voice is the language of yours. His obscurity was the condition of his planting. Your visibility when it comes, and it will come, is the condition of your harvest. Don't confuse honoring his journey with replicating it. Honor it by going further. That's what he planted for. Here's what nobody tells you about being the harvest generation. It comes with a specific loneliness that doesn't get discussed, the loneliness of carrying something forward that the people around you can't fully see yet. Some of the people who've been close to you will feel your change before they understand it. Some will name it wrongly, call it arrogance or distance, or the kind of ambition that makes people uncomfortable. Let that land without letting it redirect you. Your grandfather walked seasons when no one in the room understood the weight he was carrying. He didn't require their understanding to continue carrying it. Neither do you. The final instruction I want to leave with you is this. Protect your stillness the way he protected the seed, not as passivity, as discipline. The world will offer you endless reasons to move faster, speak louder, expand before the structure is ready. And some of those reasons will be genuinely good opportunities dressed in the language of urgency. The inherited discernment you've been activating throughout this video exists precisely to navigate that, to tell the difference between divine timing that requires bold movement and manufactured urgency that requires a steady number. Trust it. You've been developing it longer than you know. Take a breath right now, the kind that lands in your chest and stays there for a moment. Because I want the weight of this next sentence to reach you without interference. Chosen one, You are not becoming chosen. You already are. The assignment was sealed before you understood what you were carrying. The only thing that was ever waiting was your awareness, and your awareness has arrived. The seed your grandfather protected in silence is now in ground that can receive it. The map he was drawing has found the hand that continues it. The harvest doesn't belong to another generation. It belongs to this one. It belongs to you. If something in this word landed in your spirit, not as information, but as recognition, I want to invite you to do one thing before this day ends. Find the oldest living person in your family. Ask them one question. What did my grandfather want to do that he never got to do? Then listen, not to gather data, to receive the rest of your map. And if what they tell you moves something in you that doesn't have a name yet, leave it in the comments below. Not for me, but because sometimes speaking an inheritance into words is the first act of planting it.